Hello, welcome to the Chemistry World Book Club podcast. This month we are reading United We Are Unstoppable, 60 Inspiring Young People Saving Our World, edited by self-described climate and energy nerd at Bloomberg News, Akshat Rathi. It's a book of short stories told by young people who are fighting for their homes and their futures in the face of climate change. I'm Katrina Kramer, Chemistry World Science correspondent and your book club host. I'm very excited to be joined today by two of Chemistry World's newest reviewers, Montserrat and Don.
I am Montserrat Garduño. I am a postdoctoral researcher at the National University Autonomous of Mexico and a former PhD from the University of Manchester.
My name is Don Carpinetti. I'm a chemistry instructor at Craven Community College in New Bern, North Carolina in the United States. And for the past year, I've been a member of the US's National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Planet Stewards program. So I have some experience with environmental projects of my own.
Fantastic. So Montserrat, you wrote the review for Chemistry World. What is the book about?
Yeah, that's right. I wrote the review. So the book is about, well, it's called United We Are Unstoppable, and it tells the story of 60 young people who are fighting against climate change. This whole movement about JAWS activism kind of started with Greta Thunberg back in 2018, but she has made clear that it's not just her story, or it's not just like a movement of a person alone. We are in United We're Unstoppable. Akshat Rathi, the author, gives voice to these other very young people to tell their stories and how they are fighting, whether through education, law, science, or technology.
So what did you make of the book? Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, it was a very enjoyable book. It's very easy to read. It's very fast to read. It's very eye-opening as you realize how children that should be just like living their young years, maybe playing with their friends, are taking action against the climate crisis. So it's very enlightening. It's a very nice book.
Don, what did you make of it?
I also thoroughly enjoyed the book. I read it through in one sitting the first time, stopping only to look up some of the places on the map here and there. I had to go back and do a second read through to take notes to get ready for the review podcast. But I found it very inspiring. I was a little worried that it might be repetitive, since everybody's talking kind of about the same topic of environmental activism, but there's a lot of variability amongst the essayists, and it's very easy to read.
So yeah, I absolutely agree. I enjoyed the book. It's very, very nice to see the breadth of what people do to address something. I mean, they're essentially all working towards the same goal, meaning kind of appealing on those in charge to make steps towards addressing climate change. But the way they do it is a huge variety. Don, you had your son have a look at the book or read a bit of it. Could you tell me how old he is and what he made of it?
Yeah, my son is 17. In fact, just today he went to his first day of his senior year in high school. He read through the first two sections of the book on Asia and North America. And he was really struck by the passion of the essayists and how a lot of the teenagers in our area just don't have that same direct effect of the environment. We get hurricanes here on the East Coast of the United States, but we've never been hit with a really bad one. And when we do have a hurricane go by, it seems to be more of an inconvenience. It's not the same life-changing event that a lot of the essayists are experiencing with kind of increased ferocity of storms. There seemed to be a real relationship between infrastructure and how quickly you get back on track that kind of separated him and his friends being a little bit interested in the environment versus some of the essayists who've really had it impact their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I was really struck by how people approach, how passionate they are about addressing the subject, particularly if they're from countries where, you have a lot of other problems, like just generally infrastructure, political struggles, sometimes wars, things like that. And Mansuret, you mentioned in your review that what really struck you, that when people address climate change, they also address a lot of the other inequalities that exist, gender inequality, racial, economic. So I thought that was very striking, came out in a lot of the essays, really. What was your kind of, the thing that you felt was most striking to you?
It was from a person from Canada. He's an indigenous people. He's 22. He's the outreach coordinator from Friday for Futures Toronto. He kind of give voice to the indigenous people from their community and make sure that it's centralized rather than tokenized. Mm-hmm. So with his story, I realized that fighting climate change is not just about what we used to think like about probably saving the polar bears. It's about as well climate justice, and it talks about fighting all kinds of inequalities, such as gender or economic inequalities as well. So another thing that made me think is that probably all of us are already doing something in favor of climate change, such as, I don't know, maybe going vegan or recycling plastic, but it's not enough. So to achieve a true change, a systematic change, we need a massive transformation. Mm-hmm. So we need mass movement. So we need millions of people working together fighting against climate change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely came out of the book that these people are not just doing the things that, the average person might think this is good for the climate, take more train journeys, use the car less, don't fly if you can. But they're doing a lot more in terms of appealing to the wider community, to the people in charge in particular. Don, what did you think? What was your kind of favorite part, or maybe the thing that kind of resonated most with you?
Yeah, I have a quote from Akari Tomita from Japan. In his essay, he said, change begins because of people who care. And that really struck me, that we should all be caring about having a livable environment, because none of us can survive if the environment isn't livable. So we should all be trying to do our part, not only changing our own habits, but pushing for a higher level regulatory and industrial changes. And I think it's really going to take all of us working together to see the kind of change that I think we all want to see in terms of protection for the environment.
Mm-hmm. So to find out more about the book and what it took to write it, I called up the editor, Akshat Rathi, who's based in London, the other day on Zoom.
I'm Akshat Rathi, and I'm a journalist with Bloomberg Green. So we've seen a lot of protests from young people, especially before the pandemic, and the momentum of how many young children showed up on the streets was just building up really strongly over the past 2 years. And my hope with this book, which I've edited, is to bring through voices that we don't typically hear when we read news stories about what's happening on the streets with these young climate activists. And so it features essays from 60 young people in 40 different countries. And I was hoping that I can show the scale of the movement, but also the diversity through which these people have come to it.
So when you say young people, where did you have the cutoff? What do you define as, this person, speaks for their generation and this person's maybe from the next generation?
So the youngest person in the book is about 11 and the oldest person is about 28, 29. What we define as young is really people who've been at the start of their career. And in some places where schooling can take time or people come to schooling later, you have to be much older to be able to get a start in life. And so that's why I didn't want to draw a very hard line on what we define as young. But the goal was to try and show that there are people of a really big range within this generation that has realized the urgency of climate change and what we need to do about it.
How did you manage to get the contribution from all of these people all over the world?
It was a lot of fun. And luckily, this generation of young climate activists is very well versed in using the internet. So finding them wasn't that hard. And then getting them to write was a little bit easier. And then editing and working with them was just a pleasure.
So what was the most interesting, what's maybe most surprising thing you learned while working with these people and, putting the book together?
Lots of things. So, there were stories of people who suffered through natural disasters, many of which we can now connect to climate change directly, that are seared in their memories. And to be able to hear those stories was heartening and just shows how vast this problem has become. Others, I thought I as a reporter for who writes on climate change and has done for the past 5 years, I thought I knew quite a bit. And yet, given the scale of this problem, the geographies in which climate change is having an impact, I was surprised to learn, for example, that the Panama Canal, which connects the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, is affected by climate change because the canal itself is made of lakes, and those lakes have fresh water in them rather than seawater. And so if there is changes in rainfall patterns which are happening, it affects how the water fills up in the canal. And that affects Panama's GDP, which is 10% dependent on ships going through the Panama Canal. So these sorts of impacts that I hadn't known were also becoming clear as I was editing these essays.
And how did you feel like what young people wrote about their own experience differs from what you usually hear? As you said, in news stories, you usually hear like climate change experts or researchers, people who are adults and have been doing that for a long time.
One thing that comes through in a number of essays is this frustration that young people aren't taken as seriously. And the reason is that they say they understand the science and they understand what needs to be done. And all they are doing is really raising the points that other adults have made previously. So why is it that young people can't say that anymore? That's one frustration that is common across. Another one that came through was the difficulty of being able to organize protests. We live here in the UK. Many of us live in democratic countries. Protests are a right that we take for granted. Many of these young activists are in countries where protests are not so easy to organize, and government crackdown is a serious problem. And so how you go about doing that is also a challenge that young people have. And then finally, we think we adults have it busy. These young people have it really busy. They're tied up in school and they have so many assignments that they need to complete. And yet they have to find this extra time to go out and be an activist and organize protests and give talks and, interact with media like me.
And what do you want the reader to take away in terms of maybe things they do or maybe the way they think about things? Is there anything specific you feel readers should take away?
One of the biggest things we haven't done with climate change is we haven't talked about it enough with other people. There are people who are hyper aware of the problems, but they either keep it to themselves or just talk to the networks that are people who are also aware. And my hope is that this book will start conversations with people who are perhaps not as interested or don't think it's as much of a problem. And the stories, and humans love stories, these stories could be the place for starting those conversations.
That was Akshat Rathi talking about United We Are Unstoppable. So did you feel there was anything missing or anything you didn't like about the book? So far, you've both been pretty positive.
One thing that I noticed missing a little bit is it's not a science text. A lot of the essays talk about things like anecdotal evidence, which from a scientific point of view bothers me a little bit because it's the same kind of thing you hear from climate deniers, like, hey, I got a snowball, so global warming is not true. So I kind of missed maybe references to deeper science, like maybe an editor's note here or there, like, yes, this storm may be linked to global warming because of rising ocean temperatures, but it's impossible to make a specific direct link to every storm. you probably shouldn't read it if you're looking for environmental science. You should read it to be inspired. But I was kind of missing some of that deeper science.
Yeah, I saw there were like little snippets at the end of some chapters that kind of explain some of the bit, but they were very, very brief. If you wanted maybe to get the audience who's maybe a little bit climate skeptic, you know, who needs a little bit more evidence to really see what the underlying science says, because the people who are writing are themselves, obviously, you know, they already know their cause. They don't, you know, need further evidence, but maybe the reader does. And actually, one thing I thought, so the book itself only has a couple of illustrations, just like the cover does. There are a couple of photos on the back of it, showing some of the people who contributed to the book. Obviously, not all of them. So what I actually thought, and I think Don, you mentioned it, you looked up things on the map. I would have loved this as a big kind of coffee table book, maybe like an adult's version. So I guess pictures of the people, their environment, you know, maybe things that are important to them, these kinds of things, and like, you know, pin drop on a map to see where they are. That's something I was like, can you make that version? That'd be excellent. Montserrat, what did you think? Anything missing for you?
I don't know. Well, I just wanted to comment about the referencing an adult version of the book. Like would have like more references, or maybe we have to think about what is the target.
Who do you think it is?
I think as Don was saying, is very inspiring. I think it would be for young people, for teenagers, for middle school age people. The aim of the author is just to inspire more young people.
I agree that, you know, it's supposed to inspire, and like I feel a lot of the people in the essays are talking about what inspired them as well, and a lot of times it was this single event. So I think one of the things that stuck in my head was this little girl in Canada, you know, when she was 7, she went on walks with her parents, and there were signs saying there's an oil pipeline here, don't dig here. And then her parents said, you know, if you dig here, you know, all the oil will come out and gush out and like flood the environment here. That really kind of scared her, and that kind of was like the switch that made her interested in you know, in the whole climate change area. So I thought, and a lot of people report something similar. You know, there are anecdotal events, essentially, like a storm or, you know, changes in the patterns of agriculture, droughts, stuff like that, which, yeah, in a whole, like from a scientific point of view, is maybe not particularly useful, but for the people, it did inspire them, and so they can then inspire others. So who would you recommend this book to? So Montserrat, you already said you would recommend it to younger audience. Dom, what do you think?
I think anyone with a sort of a passing interest in environmental issues or even international relations issues would enjoy the book and be inspired by it. I was kind of struck, I think it would be particularly useful in a middle grades classroom environment where you could use some of the essays as sort of a starting point to begin to discuss environmental issues, or assign different essays to different students for classroom presentations or something like that. And you could really use it to kind of ground your science lessons and maybe even your geography lessons as you kind of cross the globe, visiting all these different places.
So do you think the fact that these essays were written by young people themselves, kind of maybe their tone or just the fact that they are, helps to kind of engage that audience, that younger audience?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think my experience with my son, at least, there's a bit of a hesitance to listen to what adults say, but there's maybe a little more acceptance of something coming from your peer group. Even if it's the exact same information, you'll listen to your friends more so than your elders. So I think that would be helpful.
But yeah, a lot of them are like teenagers or very young adults, and they're spending so much of their time, as you said, Montserrat, they should be, you know, meeting with their friends or, you know, studying or doing something else on something that is so important to them, even though they don't get anything out of it in terms for their career, but they obviously might get something out of it in terms of their life. So, whereas I think when I was a teenager, I didn't do any of these things. I just, you know, spent my time doing a lot of other things. So I think that was very impactful, very impressive to, you know, have these people very dedicated to something like that.
Yeah, one very important thing is that like a general feeling is that they feel overlooked. So they are working so hard and they feel like they are not listened to. There are people saying that they are making a profit out of this, or they want to build a career out of this. And well, I remember one of the stories. The person was saying, I don't want anything from this. I just want to save the planet. That's my ultimate goal.
I was thinking they're doing a lot more than, I or maybe, some of my peers would have done as a teenager, a lot more than a lot of adults are doing. So, they probably should be listened to. I think they without making the point, they make a very good argument for themselves that they should be listened to. Don, sorry, what were you going to say?
No, I was going to say, I agree. I noticed a theme in a lot of the essays that the writer would mention that their parents were proud of them, but also worried about them because of how much time they were devoting to their projects. And that kind of struck me as a parent that, you don't want your teenagers to be worrying about stuff like that. And maybe it's time for the parents to step up and do their part more so that the kids don't have to be the leaders of some of this movement.
What was interesting is that the book doesn't really tell you what to do if you want to join, this fight these people are fighting against, climate change. So what did you feel people should take away from it? What should they do?
It's good that the book is bringing awareness, and it's good we are like taking steps towards fighting climate change, such as recycling and all this kind of stuff. But we have to be aware that it's not enough, and we have to take by example these very young kids and probably start doing something bigger.
So yeah, I thought it was interesting that the book makes a really good point of showing you, even if you have very few means, if you have internet access, that gives you a lot of power to potentially just, send an email to someone who might be in charge of something, to your local politician. Because if a lot of people are doing that, then, who knows where that might lead. So if you want to know more about the brave young people taking on problems ranging from single-use plastics to government inaction in their fight against climate change, United We Are Unstoppable is published by John Murray and is available now. And it's only $9.99, which is actually a really good price for a really nice hardcover book. Next month, it'll be the End Times Now book club with The End of Everything, Astrophysically Speaking, by cosmologist Katie Mack. The book explores 5 scenarios of how the universe might meet its ultimate demise and what they would look like if anyone was still around to see them. Until then, bye!